the
Yarra
Riverkeeper Association.
The Yarra Riverkeeper Association acknowledges that the Yarra catchment is the traditional land and waters of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to the elders who have cared for country since time began, to the elders who are healing country today, and to the emerging elders who continue the journey of enriching culture. We acknowledge that the river, now called the Yarra, is traditionally known as the Birrarung, and that name has never ceased to be the name of the river. The Yarra River stretches 242 kilometres from the Yarra Ranges into Victoria's Port Phillip Bay. The Yarra has 50 creeks and rivers that join at some point along its length. 22% of the Yarra is urbanised, 21% is natural vegetation, and 57% is agricultural land. Historically, the Yarra River was treated as a large open sewer and is still suffering today. The three main issues facing the Yarra are overdevelopment, nature under stress from invasive species and habitat loss, and poor water quality. The health of the Yarra is directly linked to the flora and fauna that inhabit it. Litter, construction, pollution, and invasive species make it difficult for the river's ecosystems to remain stable. This is Andrew Kelly, the current Yarra Riverkeeper. He is the voice for the Yarra River and the association. Andrew's goal is to continue to advocate for the river to the public and government to ensure that both the Yarra's waterways and riverbanks are healthy, protected and loved. But Andrew is not alone. The Yarra Riverkeeper Association is a part of a worldwide network called the Waterkeeper Alliance. There are over 300 waterkeeper groups around the world who look after their local waterways too, which is a great way to keep an eye on what goes on around the world. So what do we do? Well, we tell the story of the Yarra and its history. We educate the community about the current problems for the Yarra and how we can help. We do this through Andrew's work as the voice, but also through clean-up events and one of our current projects, restoring green areas and regrowing spaces around the Yarra. First off, Tom, our Environmental Stewardship Officer, is going to talk about ecological restoration and some of the issues we are facing as a community. Then I, Anthony, the Litter Officer, will talk about what happens when you miss that jump shot for the bin and where that rubbish can end up. Lastly, we'll introduce to you the Atlas. No, not that Atlas. The Yarra Catchment Atlas, a tool to submit sightings and see maps of what's going on around the Yarra. Let's go.
G'day everyone, I'm Tom, and I'm going to take up a bit of your time with some chat about ecological restoration, plants, and hopefully just some interesting stuff in that zone. Now, I think the most appropriate place to start to make sure that we're all on the same page with what it is and why it's important is to just run through a couple of the core ideas just to form a base of understanding of concepts and context, and we'll just sort of roll through it all and see where we end up.
So, ecological restoration is the process of assisting recovery in a degraded, damaged or destroyed ecosystem. To me, as soon as you start defining something as ecological, this immediately focuses on what is living in the space rather than what the space looks like or any other aspect. This includes the flora and the fauna. Ecology is sort of the holistic relatedness of whatever given space you are looking at. So a good way to think of ecological restoration is as a process with a goal to create landscapes that support themselves through the complex web of enhancing and regulating interactions that occur in a healthy landscape. Healthy landscapes have super broad implications for the health of our society. Why? Well, we depend on a lot of the services that come from the environment for so much of what we do in our day-to-day lives. First cab off the rank, let's just say healthy landscapes are better for the atmosphere. We're talking photosynthesis and the carbon and nitrogen cycles and carbon sequestration, to name a few of the buzziest words going around the environmental sector at the moment. But then more broadly, healthy landscapes and the life they support provide us with enhanced food, fibre and fuel production, and they also have deep cultural significance, ranging from areas of religious and spiritual significance to areas that host and create recreational activities, all of which contribute to enriching our lived experience as humans. Although let's try not to view landscapes as something there to just support us humans. The land was around a long time before us, and it'll be around for a while after us. So it's just a relationship that we have to manage, just give a little, get a little type of thing. Okay, now why don't we talk a bit about ecosystems and ecology and balance in these areas. So the reason that balance exists and that natural ecosystems are so adept at maintaining themselves is because the ecological interactions within a healthy ecosystem act to enhance and to regulate each other. When a new species is introduced into an ecosystem, the ecology of the system can be undermined by the sudden change in shape and flow, shifting the balance away from the years of natural design towards a more superficial landscape, potentially and perhaps paradoxically with less biodiversity, which doesn't offer the food, the shelter, the habitats, or even really the same type of nutrient cycling that ecosystems have developed to require and support over time. So why is maintaining these structures and cycles so important? Well, it's kind of like Jenga. When you pull a brick out, the tower still stands, but you're just slowly removing that support system and destabilizing the structure the further you deviate from the initial steady setup. It's very much a system approach. When all things are doing their part, the system works. But if, say, a particular type of plant is outcompeted by an invasive weed, well then maybe that plant provided food or a habitat for a particular type of animal, and that relationship degrades, and with it so do the benefits it provided to the system, like nutrient cycling or maybe natural regulation of a pest and so on. So that's sort of like the internal function of ecosystems, but there are also a few risks and problems associated with the current state of the physical spacing and interlinking of different ecosystem cores. And it's a problem that is resulting from the sprawl of urban living and the increasing human population. This is habitat fragmentation. So what is something that we're doing to try to maintain connectedness between habitats and populations? This might be a concept that you've come across, but let's talk cores and corridors. A core is basically a highly habitual zone, and a corridor links two or more cores. Pretty simple stuff, and just another piece in the puzzle of healthy ecosystems. So corridors between habitats are a great metaphor, really, and if we apply this to a landscape, with habitats or cores being the different rooms of the house and corridors being the corridors, we provide movement between the rooms. This linkage allows for so many benefits in facilitating enhanced resilience in ecosystems. One of the most important in the long run being the maintenance of the genetic pool. When we restrict the space that life can exist in, not only do we restrict access to things like food, habitat, and other organisms, but also to genetics. This is very important. Low genetic diversity equals low species resilience, and once genes go extinct, that's it, they're gone. It's called genetic bottlenecking, and a great example of this effect is the cheetah, if you want to learn more about it. This is where we say plants. Their use in creating corridors is that they provide this medium for organisms to move through. And before we get on too much, let's just put plants on a pedestal for a moment. They're great. They provide and help support so many important ecosystem services. But one great benefit that often gets glossed over is that they essentially protect and keep nutrients cycling in the soil. This is important for ecosystems. Soils are like the base of ecosystems. They hold so much more life inside them than on top of them. So anything that protects or enhances the soil is important, particularly when we want to build healthy ecology. It all starts from the ground, and having plants in soil improves soil structure, reduces erosion from things like wind and water, and in turn allows us to just build the topsoil. So a couple of quick takes before we move on. Plants, they provide cover, feed and habitat for animals, and protection and improved structure for the soil. They are important. Soils, They hold a heck of a lot of life. They are also important. Balance regulates and enhances. It is good. Ecological restoration. It helps all of this stuff, and it's also just a bit of fun.
Hi everyone, my name's Anthony. I'm the Litter Project Officer with the Yarra Riverkeeper, and I'm going to be taking you on the journey that plastic takes to get from our streets to the rivers. Then I'll talk about what it is that we do and how you might be able to get involved or help in other ways. So let's have a look. So, you missed the buzzer shot and your bottle, can or pen lid falls to the ground. For you, maybe that is where it ends, but for the pen lid, its journey is just getting started. Our streets have thousands of drain entry points. You have seen them, but likely never noticed how important they actually are. When something falls to the ground, it's only a matter of time before it finds one of these drains. These pieces can be taken by the wind or the rain, and they flow into the drain system. The water, along with the pen lid, is carried through the stormwater network, which is a bunch of tunnels that take the rain from the street and lead it into the nearest creek or river. So that pen lid, or a dropped McDonald's cup, let's say, will be taken to the nearest creek to you. Then it will spend some of its time floating down the stream. Some of these pieces might get caught in the plants on the side or sink to the bottom of the creek, but most of it floats along the surface. Now it links up with a river, and the plastic makes its way to the city, where hopefully it can get caught by one of the Bandalong litter traps. These are incredible litter traps and have been on the water for 20 years. Probably longer than most of you have been alive. Plenty of our birds hang out here too, looking for something to eat in the rubbish. However, this is not normal and they shouldn't be looking in there for their food. The litter that escapes travels further and further down until it either goes out into the bay, where a lot of our favourite beaches are, or washes up on some rocks like this clip in Docklands. The soil in these rocks are layered so deep with plastic that you could go digging and still find it down there. So why do we find so much plastic ending up in, let's say, Docklands? It's because of this journey. Have a look at this map of urban Victoria. Take a moment to find the area that you live in. Now imagine if everyone dropped just one piece per week, on purpose or by accident, and then think about that journey. Eventually, all of that rubbish, millions of pieces, will float down the Yarra or Maribyrnong River into the Port Phillip Bay. What are the most common things we find in our rivers? Well, plastic fragments are by far the most pervasive type of plastic that we find. There are hundreds of millions of fragments flowing down our river every year. Then we have polystyrene balls. Technically, they're called expanded polystyrene, or EPS for short. And then finally we have single-use plastic bottles like Pepsi, Coke, water. You can find cans of V, any brand you name, it's there. Here are some plastic fragments of different colours, shapes and sizes, and also some nurdles that came from the Yarra River. Nurdles are those little plastic balls that are used to make things like your pen lid, your Coke bottle, or other plastic items. They are very dangerous and you can find plenty of information about them online. Just look up nurdles. Next we have polystyrene, which is usually used for cups, boxes for fruit and produce, and in packaging to help your new purchase arrive undamaged. But of course, they break up into thousands of little balls and have been found in the stomachs of various animals. And lastly, plastic bottles. There are hundreds of them in the river, waiting to break down and become plastic fragments. Now, litter isn't everything. Pollution extends to liquids as well, like turning our waterways different colours. In Melbourne, we've had pink, green, red and orange. Now this is not healthy for the river and it is an act of pollution. But there are also oil spills and other chemicals that we can't see that do still have an impact on the life in the water. Okay, so by now you've probably seen how when someone drops something on the street, it can make its way into the rivers and creeks. But what are the effects of this on our wildlife? So we now know that plastics can attract toxic chemicals such as pesticides and colorants and flame retardants onto their surface from their environment. Now, many of you have probably heard of microplastics as well. So that's the degrading of a piece of plastic, so maybe a bottle cap or a wrapper that a friend or stranger drops. It will eventually break down until they become smaller than 5 millimeters, and that's a microplastic. So a wide range of marine organisms and vertebrates, such as birds, fish, sea turtles, crabs and mussels, have been documented with microplastics in their stomachs. So microplastics are ingested by marine organisms and can cause physical and chemical damage, so poisoning of organs and blocking of digestive tracts. There's a whole list of things. So after the microplastics are eaten, these chemicals can remain in the animal and move into parts that we eat. So we don't know what the effects of these chemicals by magnifying up the food chain are. So that's a bit of a concern, I'd say. On the left here is a photo I took near the Burnley Harbour. It's of an Australasian darter, which the guys at Parks Victoria told me that it had had that cloth in its mouth for months, for a long time. And so what that shows is that birds can mistake plastic and human items for prey or food. And then if you look in the top right corner, this bird that's sitting on the beach, it can't fly. It has a lot of troubles walking. And that's because it has all of this plastic in its stomach. It's really scary to see our wildlife consuming plastic at such a high level, and to know that it all comes from our streets is quite sad. Alright, but what about at a microscopic level? Well, zooplankton, along with many other microscopic invertebrates, have also been documented to consume microplastics. We've found microplastics at the bottom of the ocean. They've found microplastics in the Arctic ice. So it's absolutely everywhere. It's hard to track it and to get rid of it. And because it's everywhere, we find that even at the very, very, very microscopic level, our life is still eating plastic pieces and mistaking them for food. So first, let's look at what other people have done. So there's numerous ways that you can respond to a problem like this that's on such a global scale. And these are just some of the more physical ones that we can show you. So the Seabin project was designed by 2 Australian surfers. You might have seen it before if you've been on Facebook for a while. And it's essentially a bin that sits in the water and sucks plastic into it. Then there's the Riverkeeper Association, which is us, and we run cleanup events called blitzes, where people come down, get in a kayak and pick up some rubbish, and maybe one of your parents has attended those. The Bandalong litter traps, which you saw before, which have been on the water for a long time and have done an amazing job removing litter. Then there's more artistic projects like the plastic whale that you can see there, which captures a lot of attention, gets shared a lot, and it raises awareness about the issue of plastic in the water. And then other campaigns like For Ocean, where people clean up rubbish, and then that rubbish gets made into bracelets that people can purchase to help fund their campaigns. So they've probably cleaned up a whole bunch of plastic and littered items from beaches around the world. And lastly, Clean Water Group. So these guys are from Queensland, and they've got a vacuum on a boat which sucks up stuff that they vacuum off the banks of the rivers. So I've done this with them before. I've been there holding that vacuum. It's a lot of fun, more fun than vacuuming your own house, that's for sure. And it's just crazy how much stuff can pile up on our banks. So there's 6 kind of practical, real world things that are happening, but that's not everything as well. So what can you do then? Well, the fastest way you can help is by picking up rubbish when you see it. Not because it's a good thing to do, but because you know where it will end up if you don't. You can make a difference by telling others what you have learnt. You can do it by choosing not to buy something you will use just one time and then throw away. But there is even more that you can do in the years to come. Whether you want to create things, plan and manage, do research, study geography and history, work with social media or web developing, or go into economics, there is something that you can do with your skills to help. So, a quick recap before we move on. Litter Non-natural or organic items that we drop on the ground. Plastic is good for long-term products, but if littered into the environment will stay there for hundreds of years. It's everywhere. Plastic is taken by water and rain all over the planet. You can do something. Whatever area you end up working in, you can always find a way to get involved and do something. So before we finish up, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to this handy little online resource that we manage. It's called the Yarra Catchment Atlas. It's a great way for anyone who wishes to submit a photo of something that they have found or seen along the Yarra and to add it to our gallery. The Yarra Catchment Atlas, or the Atlas, is a data resource that collects information from other groups and organisations and puts them all in one place. It also provides a place for collecting, verifying and storing observations made by you, the citizen scientists. You can view different layers over each other to look for the answers to very specific questions like how many kookaburras have been spotted in Abbotsford in the last 5 years? Okay, so to add an observation, go to the website on your phone, scroll down until you see the Yarra observations and click on it. Then in the gallery, click on the contribution tool. Now add in your details. Then select your location and click next. And then put in the details of your observation and finally upload a photo and submit. Your images will now appear in the gallery once they've been approved by me or by Tom. And from that gallery you can view the images, or you can go into the mapping, zoom in, go to the community folder, click on community observations, and you will see your approved observations there on the map. And lastly, we'd just like to thank our sponsors, the Federation University, Melbourne Water and the state government. Thank you everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something, and feel free to share anything that you did pick up with your family and friends. Thank you.